Hey, everybody. Welcome into an all-new episode of Can We Please Talk podcast. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And not interested in tearing his shirt off for to be a public spectacle. I'm Nick Sperry.
Oh, we're going to get into who tore his shirt off when, brother. On the program today, Nick, the Republican National Convention is now complete. Nick and I look back at the week that was, the speeches post this assassination attempt on the former president's life. Did we learn anything new about the Republican side of the political aisle? More on that in just a bit. And speaking of political aisles, later on in the program, Congressman Dan Goldman stops by the program. We're going to talk about where the investigation is right now on this assassination attempt as he sits on the Oversight Committee in Congress. What does lowering the temperature mean to him? Because everyone's saying it, but is anyone actually doing it? And he actually may have contributed to some of this a while back, something that he misspoke on. More on that in just a bit with Congressman Goldman, and also what he thinks about President Biden. Should he drop out? Should he keep going? We're going to get into all of that with the congressman in just a bit. Some housekeeping notes before I say hello to Nick Severi. An all-new episode of the If You Lead Them podcast is out there. Listen on leonmedianetwork.com, wherever you get your pods. Nick, this is a good one right here. Katie welcomes in author and chief burnout officer of the Breakfast Leadership Network, Michael Levitt, to discuss his journey from experiencing burnout to becoming a burnout expert. You're going to want to check out Michael's incredible book. It's called Burnout Proof: How to Establish Boundaries to Avoid the Negativity of Stress. It's a bestseller. It's available on Amazon or wherever you get your books. Really good episode. Katie dives into it. We all experience burnout in our jobs, folks. You want to find out how to kind of not only avoid it, but, establish these boundaries to avoid negativity. Check out this latest episode that Katie did with Michael Levin. You can listen to it wherever you get your pods or over on leonmedianetwork.com. And also an all-new episode of the Double Jab podcast is out there over on leonmedianetwork.com or wherever you get your pods. This week on the program, Rich welcomes in Angel Barrientos as he gets set to take on Edwin Rodriguez this Saturday night on the Zone pay-per-view as part of the Jake Paul versus Mike Perry undercard. Huge undercard that's happening in Tampa, Florida. If you live in the Tampa area, I will be at the Jake Paul Mike Perry fight. So come say hello to me and come say hello to maybe a victorious boxer in Angel Barrientos, but you want to find out how his training's going for all of this. Listen to the all-new episode of the Double Jab podcast over on leonmedianetwork.com or wherever you get your pods. All right. Now I say hello to my buddy, Nick Severi. Nick, it's been a fast turnaround for you and I because we recorded, obviously, Sunday night after the assassination attempt of the former president. And then, we had the colonel on to talk about the wars. And now we're actually recording again because the RNC is wrapping up as we're recording this. The former president of the United States is actually speaking right now. We're going to play a little bit of his sound in just a second. But how's everything going your way? What's been the week like? Or what do you, I'm sure people first thing Monday talking about this, there's no way you can't talk about it. We've never seen anything like this in 40 something years. Some people that may listen to this weren't even alive the last time there was an assassination attempt on the president. But how's your week been so far?
It's been good. I think the biggest thing around here has just been the heat, and it's not just here. It's all over the country. So, we just had some much needed rain, the other day. What's interesting about the assassination attempt is that when we think about some of the most notable examples, we think about Reagan, and just in like recent memory, in our lifetimes, right? We have Reagan, obviously. And obviously our entire country remembers, the assassination of President Kennedy. And shortly thereafter, only 5 years later, the assassinations of Dr. King and Robert Kennedy. What was weird about Saturday, what still sits with me, is how it somehow became almost the continued spectacle of Donald Trump. There wasn't as much fear and panic. I think even as you and I offline were you starting to use that word assassination, and it started to sink in how serious this is about a political candidate in the United States being the target of an assassin's bullet. Someone who took it upon themselves that they chose that their way of participating in the political process is to try to kill one of the two people running for the presidency. And maybe it's the jadedness of our times, which in many ways I could argue I could direct a little bit toward the rhetoric of Donald Trump. It just seemed like part of the narrative of where we are these days. And it may also be the fact that I'm numb to the fact that we've seen so many mass shootings in this country. We are a very gun centered culture that when something like this happens, yeah, we're less shocked. The seriousness of this still seems sort of lost out there. And that may be very telling for the times we live in.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, everywhere that I've been going, obviously I'm down here in Florida. It obviously, everybody wants to talk about it. And, Florida's is red country, let's be honest. And, there's a love down here for Donald Trump. And obviously we talk about this with the congressman, right? It's not about what side of the political aisle you're on. Like, you can recognize a tragedy and say, we've got to do something about how we got to this point. But there has to be an awareness from both people, like you were mentioning, that are kind of responsible in all this. We're going to play a little bit of the former president's speech in just a second, because he kind of details a little bit more of the events of Saturday in a very, I don't know. We'll play it in a sec. If you haven't seen the former president's speech, please go watch it. But first, Nick, I teased it at the beginning, the week of the RNC here, a lot of speeches, 100 speakers speaking at this. Everybody that's in the conservative ethos, from Tucker Carlson to Charlie Kirk to the Senator Tim Scott, Marco Rubio, anybody who's anybody is in Milwaukee right now at this convention that just wrapped up. A bunch of different speeches were given throughout the week. And, obviously in the events of Saturday, in the wake of what happened Saturday, you would think that there'd be a shift in perspective tone. You would think, right? Like, hey, they almost took our guy out, the proverbial day, not they being somebody. And so maybe we should, figure out how we lower the temperature. It's been a common theme, lowering the temperature, yet no one's reaching for the dial to lower the temperature. So I want to play a little bit of some of these speeches in the lead up, because the vice president spoke on Wednesday night, JD Vance, who's going to be the vice presidential nominee. But there was other speakers, like I mentioned, Tucker Carlson, even some ones that ran against the former president in the primary season, Nikki Haley, Ron DeSantis, and one mystery guest, brother, that back in 1985, when the mega powers broke up, broke my heart. Take a listen.
I watched the video of what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania about 50 times. I think I was one of about 8 billion people around the world who watched it. And the more I watched it, the more it struck me that everything was different after that moment. Everything. And this convention is different. The nation is different. The world is different. Donald Trump is different. When he stood up after being shot in the face, bloodied, and put his hand up, I thought at that moment, that was a transformation. This was no longer a man. Well, I think it was divine intervention.
We should acknowledge that there are some Americans who don't agree with Donald Trump 100% of the time. I happen to know some of them. And I want to speak to them tonight. My message to them is simple. You don't have to agree with Trump 100% of the time to vote for him. Take it from me, I haven't always agreed with President Trump. But we agree more often than we disagree. We agree on keeping America strong. We agree on keeping America safe. And we agree that Democrats have moved so far to the left that they're putting our freedoms in danger.
We are facing an invasion on our southern border. Not figuratively, a literal invasion.
My fellow Republicans, let's send Joe Biden back to his basement and let's send Donald Trump back to the White House.
I've squared off against warriors, ooh yeah, savages, and I've even, like I said, body slammed giants in the middle of the ring. And I know tough guys, but let me tell you something, brother. Donald Trump is the toughest of them all. They've thrown everything at Donald Trump. All the investigations, the impeachments, the court cases, and he's still standing and kicking their butts.
All right, brother. I took my vitamins. I'm back on the microphone here. For the Hulkamaniacs out there, you'll get that reference. So some of that played there, Tucker Carlson at the beginning, Nikki Haley, who obviously during the primaries, a lot of Nikki Haley support, won a couple of states, wasn't enough to take down the former president. You heard Ted Cruz there talking about the crisis at the border, but just talking about it in the wrong way. I've been very vocal about that. It's an administrative one and the system's overwhelmed. More on that in just a bit. Then you heard a little bit of Ron DeSantis, who spoke as well about Joe Biden needs to go back to his basement. And he stole a line from Nick Savary about the weekend at Bernie's presidency, which Nick said about 3 weeks ago. So thank you for listening to the episode, Governor DeSantis, when Nick already made the reference to Joe Biden and Weekend at Bernie's and Bernie Lomax, the main character in that movie. Then you heard, last but not least, just before the president spoke earlier tonight, the famous, the immortal Hulk Hogan, Terry Bollea, who came out dressed in a suit, but in typical Hulk Hogan fashion, took the suit off, ripped his shirt, and it had a Trump Pence, where it normally would say Hulkamania type shirt on. Nick, look, I'm going to say this in August for the DNC when Bruce Springsteen comes out and anybody else who's either a celebrity, a pseudo celebrity, a famous author, a Democrat that's trying to make a name for themselves and give a speech. There's an element of performance in all of this for people that do not realize this. And I said this recently on one of my NTD news hits. There's an element of performativeness in this because your speech can't be boring. It can't have too much policy and vision because this isn't about you. This is about the delegates nominating the person that they want to be selected as president. So we really only want to hear two people speak. Wednesday night, the vice president. Thursday night, the presidential candidate. The rest of you are inconsequential, but you can't be boring because then you'll be noticed for being boring. And the GOP, I want to give them a little bit of credit in this regard. Monday night, they stacked it with a lot of minorities. There was a lot of African-American, members of Congress, Byron Donalds, Tim Scott, Wesley Hunt. All of them spoke on Monday night. It was a common refrain across social media. It's like, what's going on here that all of these folks are speaking on Monday night? And they want to emphasize that, hey, look, there is an umbrella here. Amber Rose spoke on Monday night, I believe, or Tuesday night. I forget what it was. So like I said, there's an element of performativeness. Like we're probably not going to get anybody that drills into policy here. But having said all that, Nick, and I don't know how much of the convention you've watched, and I've been watching it obviously for TV purposes, but what did you make of not only what I played there? We're going to get into the president's really somber tone. You can't believe how somber this guy got. I'm being serious right now. I'm not trying to normalize him. The man almost died. And at one point in his speech said, I shouldn't be here. And the crowd started chanting, yes, you should. And he goes, yeah, I disagree. I shouldn't. So we're going to play that in a sec. But Nick, from the lead up to before the former president started speaking, what did you make of what you heard? Or am I right that there is a performance element in this and you don't want the speech to be boring and you want to highlight the dangers that the other side of the aisle kind of brings?
Yeah, I say this to you often privately, and I'll bring this public facing for a moment. Republicans understand Americans better than Democrats. It's just that simple. It's been that way. mean, often it's been that way probably since Reagan, more or less. Um, Americans want simplicity. They want the spectacle. Um, they don't want to be taught. Now, I have most of my friends are left leaning. That's the circle I run in. It's what I consider myself a part of. But to the average American, you cannot lecture them. They don't want to be taught. That's not to say that they're unintelligent, that they're uneducated. But it really has often been the American way. And what the RNC shows us is that similar to what the Romans knew about, what's referred to, quote unquote, bread and circus, right? Feed them and entertain them. That's what the Republicans are doing now. So, we can laugh at, the antics of Hulk Hogan or, all these other, this really just this cavalcade of characters that keep taking the stage, Amber Rose, but the one word we'll never use is boring. And I emphasize this because I go back to that debate we saw 2 weeks ago, or maybe 3 weeks ago at this point. What Trump says often is complete lunacy. But what Biden said that night put away the guffaws, put away the dottiness, just was not energizing. And if you're going to win Americans over, you could be wrong, but you better be loud wrong. And you could be correct, but you better be a little in your face about it. And it's what Democrats just are struggling with now, and they have been for a while. So the spectacle of what it is, and I see it on social media as I was watching these events tonight, I'm seeing people mention, the film Idiocracy. And this film gets talked about all the time. Well, we're just a country of idiots and we don't take this seriously and we're blah, blah. Again, you're trying to lecture people who just want to get home to dinner, pay maybe a little less in taxes and take care of their kids. And I'm not saying right or wrong here. I'm just saying this is what we're talking about. People in diners, people that are just barely making by. And it's stunning that the party of rich people, the party of businesses, manages to get that more so than the other side. So the spectacle makes sense. I'm going to be interested in what we see, coming up from the Democrats, but I'll predict that it's going to be a collection of celebrities who are Oscar Award winners, Grammy Award winners, people that we're not all going to be that excited by hearing from. I'm not a fan of Hulk Hogan. I mean, I was as a wrestler as a kid growing up in the 80s, but no, MAGA Hogan, no, of course I'm not a supporter of that. But is that going to be a lot more entertaining than Meryl Streep? Probably. And that's where Republicans are at this point. The thing I always bring up, though, is throughout this week, what I've not heard is I have heard nothing of a policy vision, but I don't hear much about it. And I saw Vance's speech yesterday, and it's the same thing. And that's probably the most telling, that this is a party that in its current iteration has no vision, but they'll entertain the hell out of you along the way. And you got to make of that what you want to.
I think you encapsulated a couple of things there that I think is very interesting. I will agree with you that I think Republicans have more of the ear of the common person. And I say that to say, because I'll give you just an example. You fill out a job application right now, LinkedIn, any job board. You go to the job board. When they start asking you questions, sex. There's a popular TikTok that I sent you, Nick, recently on social media, where the guy had like 70 options. When it used to be in 1990, it was male, female. Now it was like 70 things. Half of them were made up. They were not even real. But when you go onto a job board now, you look at that and there's like 15, 16 things there. You're like, what is this? I don't know what non-binary, cisgender. And again, I'm not talking about it specifically. I'm saying this is what you see on a job board right now. Republican candidate could take that and say, look at this. Is this the America that you want? And like to what you said, the common person would be like, what is all that? What happened to male and female, right? And that's speaking more to it. And then you go out there and then you see some of these folks that they bring onto the RNC stage. And a lot of the times you and I, of course, we make fun of these folks because maybe they've crossed over into another dimension. Have they crossed over, or is it that something that they were saying ticked off the other party and they moved past them? So they were like, well, I don't have a home there. I'm just going to go over here. So I kind of agree with you in the sense that, like, I do think Republicans will capitalize on that. I'm sure people will take this to a different level and say, no, they're just fear mongers. That's all they do, blah, 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 blah. But there is this middle-ish that they could probably siphon off of. It's why Trump went to the Libertarian Convention this year to speak at it, because he knows that's another 2-3% that if he could get those people over here and say, look, we're on the same team here. I'm trying to get rid of things in the government. Don't you guys hate small government? Isn't that, what Ron from Parks and Recreation, Ron Swanson, would say? Yeah, I want to get rid of government. So I think it's true that there is that part of it. Interested to see what happens in August with the Democratic Convention. And you're right. I've said this a bunch. Nobody wants to hear from celebrities. I got mad at MSNBC when they had a Latino show that they tried to do something about Latino voices. And guess who it is? It's John Leguizamo. I'm a Puerto Rican kid from the Bronx. I don't want to hear from John Leguizamo. John Leguizamo's not in the same zip code as the rest of us that are grinding it out here in the Puerto Rican community. I'm sorry. And to your point, Dems will say, John Leguizamo, come be a surrogate, go talk. I did want to play, before we go into the congressman on the other side of the break, everybody was waiting for Thursday, this is the biggest event right now in the political calendar. Let's be honest. I mean, there was an assassination attempt on this man's life just Saturday. And here he is Thursday speaking to accept the nomination. And everyone's like, is he going to come out and say the radical left did blah, blah, blah? Or is he going to strike a more somber tone? Let's play a little bit of his speech, because he is actually just wrapping up as Nick and I are recording this. But we've got a little bit from the speech from the beginning. So take a listen.
Friends, delegates, and fellow citizens, I stand before you this evening with a message of confidence, strength, and hope. 4 months from now, we will have an incredible victory, and we will begin the 4 greatest years in the history of our country. Together, we will launch a new era of safety, prosperity, and freedom for citizens of every race, religion, color, and creed. The discord and division in our society must be healed. We must heal it quickly. As Americans, we are bound together by a single fate and a shared destiny. We rise together or we fall apart. I am running to be president for all of America, not half of America, because there is no victory in winning for half of America. So tonight, with faith and devotion, I proudly accept your nomination for President of the United States. Thank you. Our Secret Service sniper, from a much greater distance and with only one bullet used, took the assassin's life, took him out. I'm not supposed to be here tonight. Not supposed to be here.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are.
Yeah. Thank you. But I'm not.
It would not be a Trump speech without, first off, him telling you, I'm only going to talk about this once, so that way you hear it from me. And then he goes into, it was a warm July day or something like that. And then, and now for people that are not watching this part on YouTube, you're listening to us on the audio version. The speech itself, there's a lot of screens behind the former president. So the last part that just ended right there, Nick, he was saying this as they're showing the image of the bullet like whizzing by his head that was captured by this New York Times photographer, right? Because you can see the bullet in the photo. One bullet hit the teleprompter, if you recall, and then there's another one that whizzed by him. So he, that the picture is up there, and he's saying this, and as he's saying it, remember he is mentioning like I shouldn't be here, and the crowd's chant. So it's kind of impactful. Then there's a silence, and then he goes, "Thank you, but I should." And it's like a comedic relief type of thing, but it's not funny because he almost died. What'd you make of a little bit? Again, we're not going to play the whole speech here, and I encourage people to go check out the entire speech. But and again, he's about to wrap up as we're recording this. So, and again, it was a little bit of more of like he did mention in one part that Democrats, if they do truly want to unite this country, they should drop the charges. Which again, these are 4 different states, 4 different jurisdictions. One case is already done. Another case has been dismissed already, but we don't know if that's going to, get held up on appeal. What'd you make of a little bit of the speech there?
I mean, by its tone, it sounds like a person who had a near-death experience. It sounds like someone who recognized that, it wouldn't have taken that much for that bullet to have moved, another inch or two, and it would have, ended his life. The problem I have, though, is he can sound a different way. He can say all these things. But I always, as I say to you all listeners all the time, as someone who's grown up in the tri-state area, I've seen every version of this man. And every single time, it's just disingenuous. This is the same guy that, after the Las Vegas shootings, says, I'm willing to look into bump stocks and figure out what we're going to do about guns. And then immediately has a meeting with the NRA and is like, you know what? Never mind. He said recently about the AR-15 that he was going to look into getting rid of it. Do I take him seriously? Of course not. I tend to be a realist or an optimist, I guess. And so, yeah. So do I think he's serious when he sounds like a person who just survived an assassination attempt and maybe in this moment realizes that he's got to grow up a little bit? I guess. But his track record is so abysmal with actually being a genuine person. It's hard for me to take him seriously. It's going to take a lot more evidence than this. For all I know, he may have just ripped off the first Iron Man movie. We saw this. It's the same scene. At some point, Robert Downey Jr.'s character says, I shouldn't be here. And everyone's all quiet. And he talks about having a cheeseburger and, realizing his life went out a different way. I don't know. Maybe that's what he was watching before he gave the speech tonight. I don't know. But I need to see more. I didn't hear many attacks on the president, which is good. I did hear that there was a release today saying that Trump was going to make an effort to not discuss Biden in this speech, but it's a wait and see thing. We're gonna see over the next coming days, coming weeks, or the next couple of months before this election, is his tone going to change? What's interesting is that he may sound a certain way. The Republican Party may try to position themselves as being more exclusive than the way they position themselves. But there is just so many people at the event or outside of it or online that remind you of who these people are, who they side with. J.D. Vance's wife is an Indian woman. Already, we're seeing pushback against that of, was this known? What does this say about Vance? Like, the racism comes up. A Sikh woman gave a prayer earlier this week during the RNC, and I credit the RNC with recognizing different faiths. What was that met with? Racism. What is this person doing? This is against the church, blah, blah, blah. Republicans have been courting, and Trump, for example, courts these kinds of people. And that's part of your voting base. And that's who you have to answer to, no matter the tone that you take. So for all this enlightenment or awakening Trump may be experiencing tonight, are you really about that? or are you just beholden to the same bigots and lunatics that have been basically growing the foundation of your party for a while now? We'll wait and see.
We will wait and see indeed. When we come back after the break, let's talk to a member of Congress about everything that's been happening, not only this week at the RNC, but the assassination attempt on the former president, the investigation that's happening with all of this. Representative Dan Goldman, when we come back after the break. Quick break from the pod, as always, to tell you about our friends over at Fresh Roasted Coffee. Delicious tasting coffee that fuels me and Nick every episode. And now it's the summer months. It's hot out, iced coffee, cold brew, tea, iced tea specifically. Got to have all these drinks in these summer months. Nick, you a cold brew guy over there?
Yeah, absolutely. The second that the weather gets hot, my coffee gets cold. Damn, that was a nice line, actually. But right. Yeah, I just recently tried the cold brew. I was super excited about it. I definitely drink a lot of iced coffees and cold brews from different places. I order everything from Fresh Roasted Coffee, so the fact I can now get my cold brew as well from there, I'm totally in.
I knew you would be. And for the people out there that are listening, as always, thanks for supporting Fresh Roasted Coffee, because the blends, the flavors, the roast, you can go to their website by clicking the link in our show notes right now. Put in some cold brew into the shopping cart. When you get to checkout, enter in the promo code, can we please get 20, all one word, can we please get 2020? You're going to get 20% off that first purchase. All right, kind enough to give us a couple minutes here on the program, representing New York's 10th District, Representative Dan Goldman. Mr. Goldman, Mike Leon, Nick Severi, thank you so much for hopping on the program with us.
Great to be with you, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's so funny because we were trying to have you on a couple weeks ago, and obviously things have changed a little bit in this country. We wanted you to come on and talk about President Biden atop the Democratic ticket. The convention's coming up in August. We're going to get into some of that in a second, but I did want to start first with the events of what happened last week, because I know there was recently an announcement that the House is going to call the director of the Secret Service to, talk about what went wrong on Saturday from that perspective. And I know the investigation is ongoing, but just for you at the 30,000-foot overview, the former president of the United States, an attempt on his life. What did you make of not only what happened Saturday, but now as we get into the investigation phase and we find out a little bit more about the shooter and how he was able to get access with something so secure, you would think, of an outdoor venue? What do you make of it all?
Well, look, the whole thing is incredibly horrifying and very unsettling for everyone in this country, and obviously Donald Trump at the top of that list. I was shocked and really, really upset about this attempted assassination at him. And I disagree with him on just about every issue, policy, and governmental civics otherwise, but would never, ever want any harm to anybody. And I think it is a reflection of how in jeopardy and how precarious our democracy is right now that we don't yet know the motive, but certainly a candidate for president had an attempted assassination. And there's no question we need to look into how this gunman got such close access and a sight line within or without the security perimeter, and what the coordination was. And I know I sit on the oversight committee, and I fully expect that we will look into that. But there's a much bigger and I think broader issue here, which is not only our political discourse, but the epidemic of gun violence and the ease of access to a semi-automatic weapon for a 20-year-old who's clearly not well, whether it's clinically diagnosed or not. Anyone who is going to attempt to assassinate a president knowing that he's likely risking his own life is not all there. And it highlights how important gun safety legislation is. And I really hope that one silver lining to this horrific incident is that we can start to have a serious conversation with my Republican colleagues about just very basic gun safety legislation, background checks, universal red flag laws, safe storage, so that this person can't get access to a gun, an AR-15 like that. These don't take guns away from people. They just make sure that those who have them are competent and qualified to have them, so that we have fewer mass shootings than we do. And we're up to almost 2 per day now in this country.
Totally agree on that number. And with respect to what gun legislation, we've had other members of Congress talking about that. Sensible gun laws is something that should make sense and every American should be on. I did want to ask you just a follow up to that because, and I've been making the TV punditry rounds, you get asked about the events of Saturday and and President Biden said this from the Oval Office, it's lowering of the temperature in terms of rhetoric. Now, I want to make a caveat here to you because I don't agree with some of the vitriol that's being aimed your way because there's a lack of self-awareness from the other side of the political aisle with respect to the way they've poo-pooed or, made light of different events that have incited violence, right? So with that, though, I do want to ask you, because obviously everyone's been playing this clip of when you were on MSNBC with Jen Psaki, and you were talking about the threat that the former president faces, right? How do you craft a message now? Because it's making the rounds, on social media. How do you craft a message to say that, look, the threat in terms of what we're facing in November is a choice at the ballot box between this party's philosophy and that party's philosophy? And then what do you make of how do we lower the temperature? Because I just mentioned the lack of self-awareness that is involved in all of this. And we're seeing other members of Congress immediately in the aftermath of this shooting blaming Democrats and blaming President Biden for this. That's not lowering the temperature. So how do we make sense of all of this? And how do we go forward from here, Congressman?
Well, absolutely. And I'm glad you raised it. I think you're referring to a clip a number of months ago where I misspoke, and I made that very clear right after the interview and used the word that Donald Trump should be eliminated when I intended and meant to say defeated. I certainly have always condemned and will always condemn any kind of political violence, as has President Biden. And when I say that as a misspoken word, I think it is clear and should be clear to everyone, as for me at least, someone who was a former prosecutor, believes so strongly in our democracy and the rule of law, that I'm not calling for any political violence. I'm calling for Donald Trump to be beaten and defeated at the ballot box in November. And that's the exact same thing that Joe Biden has always said. The problem we run into is, as you can see from the Republicans who have been so eager to project their own misconduct and inappropriate rhetoric on Democrats. I sit on the weaponization committee of the federal government, the subcommittee that Jim Jordan created, which is a joke, trying to accuse President Biden of weaponizing the government when you look back at Donald Trump and the way that he declassified in intelligence information for political purposes, the way that he intervened in his friends' cases within the Department of Justice, the way that he pardoned more than 10% of his pardons were, associates and friends of his. And it's the same kind of thing. Their rhetoric has been really extreme. I mean, dating long back to, 2018, when the pipe bomber, if you may remember, sent pipe bombs to President Obama and Secretary Clinton and 15 other people because he admitted that he was radicalized by Donald Trump. And of course, January 6th is the quintessential example of rhetoric used knowingly to incite violence. And so I do hope that my Republican colleagues will take the tenor down. I'll certainly be more conscious of it myself because I don't want my words to be taken out of context. It's, of course, not what I meant. But the notion that within an hour of this event, J.D. Vance, now the vice presidential candidate, jumps on Twitter and starts attacking Joe Biden and Democrats as if that he called for an assassination attempt without knowing anything about who the shooter is or any of the context is really irresponsible, and it's really dangerous. And we still don't know very much about the shooter other than he was a registered Republican, and his classmates say that he was a staunch conservative and there were Trump signs in front of his House, we know very little, but it certainly is not from at this point someone who was especially politically involved either. So there's a lot that remains to be seen, and I would advise my colleagues to reserve judgment until we know more.
To that end, Representative Goldman, obviously the RNC takes place this week. The Democrats get their shot, obviously coming up. From the standpoint of temperature and messaging, what are some of the hopeful outcomes you have about how Democrats put forward their message when they take the stage soon?
Well, look, I think the pick of J.D. Vance for vice president says everything that you need to know. He is so extreme. He's inexperienced, but he believes that there should be no abortion and no exception for rape or incest. He has said that he would not have certified the last election and has made it very clear that he will not guarantee to certify the next election. He's a strong proponent of Trump's Project 2025, which will completely dismantle our government as we know it. This was a pick by Donald Trump to double down on MAGA extremism. And rather than pick someone a little bit more moderate, someone who has more experience governing, more experience in the Senate, who has been perhaps a chair or ranking member of a committee and has passed legislation. No, he picks the most extreme candidate that he could. And so there's going to be a lot for us to talk about to juxtapose our candidate with Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. I've heard people say, oh, okay, Donald Trump's going to be the good cop now. Anytime Donald Trump is a good cop in a good cop, bad cop situation, we're in big trouble.
It's very funny. I did want to ask you because, the original reason why we had reached out and we had been communicating to have you on the program was in the aftermath of the debate and what we've seen over the last couple of weeks from President Biden in different interviews on ABC News and NBC News. And I'm sure you've been vocal about this. I think you have across the media outlets. But I would love to get your perspective here because the DNC, as to Nick's point, is coming up in just a month. We're recording right now on the week of the RNC convention. So the DNC is coming up in a month. There's infighting. There's some members of Congress that have said President Biden needs to step aside, including friend of the show, Representative Seth Moulton, who's been on this program a few times. So I'm curious, first from your perspective, with respect to that, is that past us, or is this still something that's being discussed in the House and Senate Democrats? And then if it's still being discussed, where do we go from here? But if it's not being discussed, what is the rallying message that should be front and foremost in terms of the last 3.5 years of President Biden's administration and the policies he's carried forth at the DNC convention coming up in August?
Well, Joe Biden has been a remarkable president. When you look at the legislation that he was able to pass, especially his first 2 years in office when Democrats had the majority in both the Senate and the House, it's historic. I mean, there were historic investments in infrastructure, historic investments in manufacturing and bringing it back to the United States, historic investments in subsidies for building the green economy, creating jobs, becoming energy independent. We had the first bipartisan gun safety legislation in 30 years. The list goes on, lowering prescription drug prices significantly, maxing out insulin at $35 a month. These are things that really impact the middle class, the lower class, and helps to build that economy from, as he says, the bottom up and the middle out. In this second 2 years, he has showed such an incredible, steady, knowledgeable, wise leadership on the international stage. After Donald Trump had effectively destroyed our relationships with our allies, President Biden rallied all of our allies ahead of Vladimir Putin's illegal, unjust invasion of a democratic country that neighbors his own. And there was tremendous widespread global support for Ukraine. And the Middle East situation is the most complex geopolitical situation that there is. President Biden has done a terrific job of staying the course, making sure that we're supporting our democratic ally in Israel, but also doing everything that we can to end this conflict so that we can get the Palestinian civilians back on their feet. That's a really remarkable record. And I think what people are questioning right now is, can we see what he has done over the last 3.5 years for the next 4 years. And there's no question that we didn't see it at the debate. The debate was really bad. And it was sort of shocking to the extent to which I've certainly never seen President Biden like that. And so I think the conversations that Democrats are having is, as Nancy Pelosi says, was that an episode or is it a condition? And if it was an episode, that we need to really see him and see him out there meeting with constituents, having interviews, talking to voters, and doing it in an unscripted, off-the-cuff way so that we know that however old he is, 3 years older than Donald Trump, that he is with it and that he can be the leader that we need and that he has demonstrated to be. And now it's a kind of an interesting question because on the other side, you know, putting aside all of Donald Trump's faults, his criminal charges, his impeachments, his lies, his attacks on the rule of law, his destabilization of our democracy, he's also 78 years old, and J.D. Vance is a 39-year-old political neophyte. So that's now going to be a consideration as well. But I think what we are looking for, and everybody is focused on it, is making sure that the Joe Biden that has created that record for the last 3.5 years is the Joe Biden that we're going to be voting for in November.
Representative, part of this conversation, obviously having you today, in the presence of a member of Congress, right? But I want to appeal to you for a moment as an attorney. So recently you posted, and this news just broke recently, about the documents case, out of Florida involving the former president. And you had rightfully brought up just the oddness of that decision. Could you just take us through a legal lens as to how that decision gets made? Now, for obviously our listeners, the case was being dismissed because it was ruled unconstitutional for Jack Smith to be appointed. Make of that what you wish to, but yeah, Representative Goldman, if you don't mind just taking us through sort of from a legal analysis, what feels sound, more likely unsound about that decision, and just your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we look at it from a broader perspective first, and then drill down on some of the details, you really crystallize right now what is on the ballot in November, and it is not just what we talk about in terms of the rule of law and our governing abilities, the Department of Education, which Trump wants to wipe away. He wants to get rid of any reference to climate change. He wants to make all civil servants, or the majority of supervisory civil servants, political loyalists. And the list goes on. Get rid of medication abortion. We could go on. It's a 920-page document. But what's really scary is how that is lining up with what's going on in the judiciary. And so you have a Trump-packed Supreme Court that just ruled that he has absolute immunity for any act that could be considered official act while he is president, including any conversations that he has with any executive agency, including the Attorney General, if he were to say, go after my political opponents and arrest them, that cannot be used either as evidence or as chargeable conduct. So he's now protected based on what happens during his presidency. What the judge in Florida did yesterday was effectively manufacture the same kind of immunity out of whole cloth for conduct that occurred after he was president. And that judge was a judge appointed by Donald Trump at the end of his term. And so there's a consistency and a continuity here, which is that no longer does it appear as if the judiciary is truly a check and balance on executive power, on our separation of powers, on the rule of law, but the judiciary is participating in Donald Trump's efforts to tear down our democracy. And so that is on the ballot. And the reason why I say that as it relates to the Judge Cannon opinion is that this was raised in the Robert Mueller special counsel's situation. He was a private citizen and was appointed to be a special counsel. And it went all the way up to the DC Circuit, which in the appellate level is the most persuasive and significant appeals court below the Supreme Court. And that DC Circuit ruled that it was perfectly valid. You now have a rogue Trump-appointed district judge in Florida who rules against the most esteemed court of appeals in the country. And there are other instances of many occasions when the special counsel, as it is structured right now, which changed in 2000, 2001 maybe, the structure was approved and ratified by various different courts. And so you have someone who already was strongly rebuked for the way she handled the search warrant at Mar-a-Lago, which went way overboard in favor of Donald Trump, and the circuit court overruled her there. And now she's doing something else that's completely off base and outside, the fairway of what any judge would ordinarily do, designed again to protect Donald Trump. And so it will be appealed. I expect that it will be overturned, but unquestionably it will now delay the case well into 2025, and is really a reflection of how the Trump-appointed judges and the sort of far-right legal ecosphere is trying to change our law because of this rogue, extreme, conservative Supreme Court that Donald Trump has packed and added to two other justices, Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito, who have conflicts of interest right, left, and center, but continue to violate their ethics obligations and rule on these cases.
Representative Goldman, before we let you go, and can't thank you enough for hopping on the program with us today, but I did want to ask, because Nick always likes to ask this question, so I'm going to steal it from him, about your constituents, of which, I'm a New York City kid, born and raised, East Bronx kid, I obviously lived in Manhattan for a long, long time. What are you hearing from your constituents right now as we get into these summer months coming up and we're going to head into the fall for an election year? What are some of the things that you're hearing from New York's 10th congressional district and the folks that are living there?
Well, I hear a mix. Many constituents are obviously and understandably really just concerned about how they are going to pay their rent and put food on the table and pay for their health care. And if, God forbid, there were some surprising or unexpected accident that was going to cost money, where would that come from? Rents in New York are at an all-time high. We have a housing shortage, and that's true across the country. And there's just insufficient support for working Americans to be able to get access to the American dream, which is what everyone deserves in this country. So there are a lot of people who are focused on that, who are focused. I'll give you one sort of detailed example on the Affordable Connectivity Program, which you may not be familiar with, but it is a program that provides free wireless internet, essentially, for those who qualify and are under a particular poverty level, that the Republicans allowed to lapse. I hear about that all the time because that is something everybody needs, and they can't afford to pay for it on top of everything else. On the flip side, what I hear about on the national stage is real fear. There's a real fear of what Donald Trump intends to do. And you don't have to read his mind because he is very open about wanting to be a dictator, about going after his enemies, about undermining our government for his personal benefit. And people are really afraid of what is going to become of this country if Donald Trump wins the presidency.
Congressman Dan Goldman, I can't thank you enough for hopping on the program today. Continued success to you, sir. Please stay safe.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great to be with you.
All right, our thank yous there to Representative Dan Goldman, like I mentioned, out of New York. Another member of Congress for us, Nick, coming on the program. Before we sign off here, just kind of thoughts on the congressman there, because there was a lot to cover. We had originally invited him on. This was during post-debate, after July 4th, I believe it was, some campaign stops for President Biden. At the time, only one television appearance. The infighting really hadn't risen yet. Then all of a sudden, there's an assassination attempt on the other guy. And now things kind of pivot. He mentioned he's on the oversight committee. So I'm curious to see how the investigation is going to go. There's been more coming out about this kid with respect to his cell phone data, with respect to his voter registration, his parents. Just a bunch has been coming out. By the way, I haven't seen anything about the parents actually speaking about their child, but all of this is going to keep coming home to roost, excuse me, with more information coming out about it. And here's a guy who's going to be asking those questions of the head of the Secret Service agency. What'd you make of Representative Goldman and some of the answers that he gave about this lowering of the temperature? Can we really lower the temperature if one side's not on the up and up, or if both sides are not on the up and up?
Yeah, I thought he gave a really helpful, what I would consider a state of the union of the Democratic Party right now, with what's going on leading up to the convention. And like you and I were doing, I thought Representative Goldman gave a good answer as far as, in general, as members of public servants in the U.S., the need to dial down the rhetoric and really get back to the issues that matter. And I thought the question you asked at the end about his constituents, like what he's hearing, there's definitely a diversity of opinion, in District 10 in New York, where he's from. And I thought he did a good job of summarizing that and kind of helping our listeners get a sense that it's not all one way in some of these districts in terms of the political persuasions and the thinking of the people.
It's true. I mean, District 10, again, that's New York City, folks, like right in the heart of it. And rent prices are skyrocketing high. Cost of goods are really high. So he's probably definitely hearing it from his constituents there. So our thank yous again to Representative Dan Goldman. Like I mentioned, you want to check out the video portion of the interview we did with Representative Goldman. Head over to our YouTube channel, type in Can We Please Talk Podcast. We should pop right up. Audio podcast platforms, you know them by now: Apple, Spotify, Google, Good Pods. Shout out to everybody who listens to us across YouTube Music and any other platform. Shout out to Acast, our hosting platform. We can't do it without them. We can't do it without each and every one of you that listens to this program. As always, I'm Mike Leon.
And I'm Nick Saveri.
We'll see everybody next time.